Welcome to the Menopause Conversations podcast. My name's Angela Council and I'm your host for this podcast, and this is where you learn all about menopause, what is happening to your body, to your hormones, and life in general. Everything is changing and sometimes it can seem really confusing, but this is where the confusion stops right now. This podcast will share with you everything you need to know about how you can navigate your menopause transition with ease. So sit back and enjoy the show. Bye for now. So welcome back to this week's episode of the Menopause Conversations podcast. And this week I want to have a little bit of a chat to you about what personalized precision health is. And a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking about how we put on weight during menopause, and I explained the reasons why this happened. And I did actually mention in that podcast that our genes play a little bit of a role. So I'm going to develop that and take that conversation a little bit further on this episode. So I'm sure you have all in your life tried a diet that just didn't work. One that worked for your friend, your mother, your aunt or something, but it didn't work for you. Or what used to work for you in the past doesn't work for you now. Things are changing. And just as we know, every woman's experience of the menopause journey is different. Some women have hot flushes, some don't. Some have night sweats, some don't. Some put on weight, others lose it. Some have unbelievable joint pain, others have none. There are so many different symptoms that are associated with menopause, and no two women have the same experience. So your experience is unique to you. And this is why what works for someone else might not work for you. So we need to start to look at why. And this was something that had me stumped for a while, because in the past, when I wanted to lose weight, I would just go on the keto diet and it would all just disappear and I would be fine back to a healthy weight again. But as I came through menopause, things were changing. And number one, I couldn't even stick to a keto diet. And two, I was putting on more weight, not less. And I was trying to understand what was going on. So I started looking at what other women were doing. So some women were saying, oh, well, yeah, I got through menopause really easy, no symptoms. And I'm trying to go, well, what are they doing? And I couldn't find any commonality between what these women were doing. I'm going, well, are they all eating the same diet, or are they doing the same type of exercise? I couldn't find a commonality. And I started to look deeper and deeper into this. And I came across something called personalized health, which got me curious. I actually heard it on a podcast. And this coach was talking about how we can, when we understand how our body works, how our gene works, we can actually tailor solutions suited to the individual. And I thought, this sounds interesting. And I really didn't do too much about it at the time. But then it kept drawing me back, and I was looking into it more and more. And I'm going, oh, there's a lot of science around this stuff. So I went back, and then I went to an information session to learn a bit more. And it was like this was the missing piece. It was like I went, aha, because I knew in the past, when I'd been working with different women over the years, that certain women responded really well to the keto diet, which is the diet that I used to recommend to women, and other women didn't. And I used to think, oh, well, the reason why it's not working for them is they're not doing it properly. And, and we used to get really frustrated. They would get frustrated. I would get frustrated. But once I discovered personalized health, I started to understand why some women got results and some women didn't, why their bodies were different. And for me, that was time to start, as I looked into this, I knew it was time for me to kind of stop looking at a single solution that was going to work for everybody. I then went on to train to be a personalized health coach. I also started to, I learned about it for myself. I did this first. I learned it for me first, and then I've now introduced it to many of my other clients who have got great results with it. And the reason why everyone that does this gets results is because it is actually looking at you, the biology of you. And everyone is different. You are a unicorn. You are a unicorn. Every one of us is a unicorn. So we all require a unicorn type of, solution, because what's gone on in my life is not the same as what's gone on in your life. Some women have had children, some haven't, some have health conditions, some have, hereditary conditions. Some people live in the cold, some people live in the heat. Everybody is different. It's all different. And that's made up who you are today. So this is what it's all about. It's about recognizing the uniqueness of who you are and creating a solution that works for you. So what does make you different? What makes you different from every other woman on the planet? It's your genes. We are all individual. We all have an individual set of genes. And I'm not talking about the genes you wear on your butt. I'm talking about your genetic blueprint. With the exception of identical twins, they do share the same genetic code. And I'm going to talk about them in a minute. So your genes determine how tall you are, how short you are, what your hair color, your skin color, your eye color is, where you store your fat, whether or not you're naturally lean or you're naturally on the plumper side, whether or not you grow muscle easily or if you store fat easily. It also determines whether or not you've got a higher risk of certain diseases like cardiovascular disease and stroke or breast cancer. So we know that there's specific genes that code for breast cancer, the BRCA1 genes. And we actually have specific genes for every other disease as well. And if you've been told you've got a family history of, say, cardiovascular disease, so heart attack, high blood pressure, and stroke, you will have a specific gene for that. And these genes give us some clues as to how and when you're going to come through menopause. Now, a very, very long time ago, when I was studying to be a naturopath, we didn't do a lot of work in menopause, but I do remember being told that if a woman's coming through menopause and we kind of want to know what her journey is going to be like, if we look at her genetics, if we look at how her mother went through menopause or the time her mother went through menopause, if it was natural, of course, not if it was a medical menopause, and how she went through menopause, that might give us an indication of how a woman's going to go through, or it might be an older sister or an aunt or something like that. So we knew that genes played a little bit of a role, but I was kind of always taught, well, really, they actually don't play much of a role at all. Not exactly true. I've since learned not exactly true, because whilst we all have genetic makeup and we all have a genetic blueprint, if that's what you want to call it, that kind of is the baseline. That's where we sit at the baseline. But on top of that, there is something. This is relatively new science, and it's all of the science of epigenetics. And epigenetics simply means above the genes. And epigenetics are factors which determine whether or not a specific gene will be turned on or turned off, or expressed or not expressed, is what there's the term that we used. So you might have the gene, but it doesn't have to actually be turned on. And there's different factors which will influence whether or not it's turned on. So not every woman who has the BRCA1 gene gets breast cancer. And what determines this? So all these women are in a group, they've all got the BRCA1 gene. They don't all get breast cancer. It's epigenetics which determine whether or not this gene is expressed and they get breast cancer or it's not. So just a simple way to describe this, I like to think of it like we've got music. So music we can hear, but we can write music notes down on a piece of paper. And when we write notes down on a sheet of paper, so we've got music on paper, it doesn't do much, it's just there. It doesn't, we can't hear it, we can't experience it. It's just these, these things on a piece of paper, these different squiggles. But what we can do, that's basically like our genetic blueprint. We've got these squiggles written down, but we need to play them to hear the music. And depending on which instruments we use is to how that piece of music sounds. So you could, play that piece of music with just a single guitar, and it's going to sound a certain way. Or you could play that piece of music with a whole orchestra with all these different instruments, and it's going to sound so much different. So we have this blueprint, but what turns it on and how it's going to be expressed in the world is determined by epigenetic factors. Now, some of the epigenetic factors are the food that we eat. And we know that there's certain foods that when we're eating foods that are high in sugars, high in chemicals, that we're higher risk for getting cancer, particularly if you have a cancer gene. So if you've got a BRCA1 gene, when you eat certain foods, it's more likely that that gene is going to be expressed and that you will experience breast cancer. Then we can look at lifestyle and stress, environment, where we live, how we're being exposed to different toxins. So we know that if a smoker has a higher risk of lung cancer and lung diseases if they smoke, and that's because those genes get turned on. But then you have someone else who's a smoker who never gets sick in their life because they don't have those genes. And we can look at different drugs and things like that. Also relationships, our family, our social environment, our work, our travel, where we live, all plays a role in how genes get expressed. So basically, every single decision or action that you have taken in your entire life impacts your genes. So every decision you've made is an expression of who you are today and what's going on in your body, including where you're storing fat, including, because if you're stressed, and I went into this in the previous episode, that if you've got stress, you're more likely to be storing fat around your waist. So this is all determined by your genes, because not every woman who is stressed puts on weight around their waist. Some women lose weight when they're stressed. And we've probably got, oh, I wish that was me. But that's not a great thing either. But that's a different genetic makeup. Now, I did mention identical twins who have the same genes. Their genes are identical. They're a map. If they're identical twins, they got the same genetic blueprint. But what makes them different is their epigenetics, because they've either eaten different foods, they lived in different places, they've made different decisions. And this is why you can have twins who have the same genetic blueprint, but they can have different health expressions. One can be overweight, one can be underweight. One can have, say, thyroid disease, the other one could maybe doesn't have it. So it's to do with the decisions that they've made. It's to do with the food they've eaten, the way they've moved their body, where they live, their exposure to different toxins. This is what has changed their genes, their expression of their genes, and what makes them an individual. So how does all this information help? Well, it helps because it gives us clues as to how your body works. Now, when we need to go right back to the very beginning, when you're a little cell, 1 cell, 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells, 32 cells, as you expressed in utero. And when, this cell, the genetic material came from half from your mother, half from your father. Now, depending on the environment, so this is how your mother was eating, whether or not she's in stress or whatever, that's influencing your genes and how these cells are actually growing. And we've got different layers within the cells. So I'm going to get a little bit sciencey here, but I'm going to try and keep it simple. So just imagine we've got a round ball and it's got 3 layers. We've got the inside. Actually, think of a Ferrero Rocher chocolate. No, it's round and it's got a filling on the inside, then it's got a bit of chocolate, and then it's got a bit of like nut coating. So we've got 3 different layers. So on the inside, we've got what we call the endoderm. So that's the middle, and then on the outside, the middle bit is the mesoderm, and then we've got the ectoderm. So when we've got these 3 different layers. Now, these different layers actually grow. As they grow, they develop different tissue. So the Ectoderm is all about the skeleton, and it determines how tall you are, how short you are, how long your arms are, your legs are, and all of that. So that's that ectoderm, and that's growing when you're this little embryo. Then we've got the mesoderm, and now the mesoderm, the ectoderm also controls the nervous system as well. So everything to do with the nervous system. Then we've got the mesoderm, which is to do with the muscles and how you grow muscles, where the muscles grow, how developed they are. Also, adrenal glands also are controlled there within the mesoderm. There's other areas as well. I'm just going through some of the main ones. And then we have the endoderm, and the endoderm is all about the digestive system and the thyroid and the metabolism. So this is where we and it actually determines where fat gets stored and where we use our fat. Now, when we're developing, depending on the environment and our genes, one or two of those layers will be more dominant than the other. So all layers grow, but some grow with more dominance. And this is impacted by different hormones that create this different growth patterns. And that means that when we're born either as what we call an ectomorph, which means we're dominant within the ectoderm, a mesomorph, so we're dominant within the mesoderm, or an endomorph, or we're dominant within the endoderm. Or we can have a combination. So we can have an endoderm and an ectoderm person. We can have an ectoderm and a mesomorph person, and a mesomorph and an endomorph. So we can have a combination. So basically, we're one of 6 different body types based on how we developed. And this is, and as a child, determines how much we are, how fast we're growing, how slow we're growing, and where we're growing. And as we become an adult, whilst the growth patterns all start to settle down, the epigenetics now start to play a role. And the decisions and the epigenetic factors I spoke about, now they're starting to play a role, and they're impacting our genes and determining how our body is developing and what's happening with it. And this is where we get people say, well, it's hereditary that I have heart disease. Well, it might be within your genetic pattern, but it depends on the choices you've made, the diet that you've had, the way you've moved your body, your lifestyle, your stress. That all plays a role. So yes, you might have the genes, but those genes don't have to get turned on. Now, genes can get turned on and turned off. And if you've been not been eating so well, you may have turned some genes on. So now we're expressing some a different, say, condition. I'm just going to go for something simple. I'm actually going to talk. Maybe I'll go for endomorphs. Have a higher tendency to have metabolic diseases like diabetes. So I just talk about diabetes, insulin resistance, and then diabetes. So endomorphs basically have the gene for this, for diabetes type 2. And depending on their diet is to whether or not that gets turned on. And if they're eating a diet that's not right for their body, so it might be high in carbs, sugars, processed foods, they can develop type 2 diabetes. But if they change their diet and go to a more plant-based diet, they can actually change that and they no longer have diabetes. So what they've done is they've changed and they've turned the gene off. So the gene's no longer expressing. So hopefully this is making sense. Look, there's, I'm keeping it very simple, but this is how all this works. Now, when we can understand this about the body and know that there's different health types, we can then kind of almost predict what the body is going to do under certain conditions, because it gives us clues as to the biology of your body, that when you eat a certain way, this is what's going to happen. And as we're coming through menopause, when we kind of lose the protection of some of the hormones, which I've spoken about in earlier podcasts, we lose that protection of estrogen and progesterone. Now we start to see the genetic expression come through if we haven't been looking after ourselves well. So we start to see that the weight is going on, and this will happen more for endomorphic bodies because that's what they do, is they store weight, and they'll store weight around the middle. But for mesomorphic bodies, what they're going to do is they might start to actually lose muscle first before they put on they can put on fat, but they'll start to lose muscle first as they're coming through menopause. And then with our ectomorphic bodies, they actually tend not to put on any they will lose muscle. They don't put on weight. And this is the women who basically start to look like they're wasting away as they're coming through menopause, because they lose all of their muscle, and they actually lose fat as well. So when we can understand this, then we can know what the right way to eat and move is, because this tells us, how the body is working. And we also know that certain hormones impact different body types differently. So a mesomorphic body it basically thrives more on adrenaline, so they can deal with more stress than, say, an endomorphic body does. Endomorphic body doesn't do very well with stress at all, and will tend to store fat when they're stressed because it's a protection mechanism. Whereas the mesomorph, they'll thrive on stress. And then we look at the ectomorph, they're more likely to get issues with their gut because they have a nervous gut, and when there's lots of stress, it impacts their gut. So all of this information we can pull together, and then knowing this, we can then determine what is the best way for a certain person to eat. So does the common things around intermittent fasting, keto, vegetarian, carb, whatever, it's different for a different body type. So a mesomorphic body, because they're more muscle dominant, needs a high protein diet. And a keto diet probably works really, really well for them. They need to keep firing up those muscles. They need to be eating on a regular basis every couple of hours. But on the other side is the endomorphic body. Now, the endomorphic body has the longest digestive tract and easiest to actually store fat. So they would likely do better on intermittent fasting. They don't need to be eating too much, because when they're eating too much, what it does is it triggers insulin responses. And as I said earlier, an endomorphic body is more likely to express insulin resistant genes and then diabetes. And we don't want that. So we actually need to have less food for those bodies. And then with the ectomorphic bodies, they're very thin and wiry, and they can't store anything. So they need to be eating, but it needs to be really easily digested food. And they need lots of carbs, because it's all about their nervous system, and carbs feed the nervous system. So I know this might sound a little bit confusing, but I'm going to make it a little bit easier for you. If you want to learn more about this and learn how you can identify what specific body type you have, which one of the 6 you have, and what the best style of eating for you is, and also exercise, because some bodies are better with weights and lifting heavy weights. Other bodies are better with doing marathon style running. If you want to know more about that, and to do with the amount you eat and exercise and the timing and all of that, join me for the free 5-day Secret to Thriving in Menopause workshop that starts on the 18th of September. Now, in this workshop, I'm going to be going through a little bit more detail about the genes and all of that I've spoken about here in the podcast. But I'm also going to be going into each one of the different health types or body types, and explaining how you can determine which body type you are. And, it depends. We look at different things about how tall you are, how big your hands are, your neck measurement and things like that. So I'm going to go into that so you can identify which health type you are. And then also, part of that workshop, I'm going to go through with you and help you create your own personalized blueprint based on your health type, so that you can then know the best type of foods, the best way to exercise and all of that. We're going to go into all of that in the workshop. When you can understand this, you then actually know your personal biology. Now, this worked for me. I was the first experiment on this to see if this worked. Worked for me. I dropped 24 kilos. I stopped the pain. I stopped the hot flushes. And now I live a life that is in alignment with my body, with my personal biology. I understand how my brain works, the biology of my brain. I understand the biology of my body, and know that this is the way my body is designed to be. For me, it's, waking, having a slower morning, doing my exercise in the afternoon. That's what works for me. Doesn't work for everybody. Some women need to be up and exercising first thing in the morning. And it's really, what this is actually tapping back into your own intuition and actually listening to your body, because your body has it knows what it wants, but we allow society to tell us this is the way we're supposed to eat, this is the way we're supposed to exercise, and we stop listening to our bodies. Many of us have stopped listening to our bodies, and it's amazing when I go through this with my clients, and they go, oh, it's so nice not to have to rush first thing in the morning, because I always felt better going slow, but I was told I had to do everything, busy first thing in the morning. And when, the more women start to recognize and accept their biology, the better they start to feel. Now, I go through this in a lot of detail in my Embrace program, and I'll be giving you a good overview in the free workshop. And the women that come in and work with me in the Embrace program, I get 100% results when they actually follow their own biology. This is not about a diet. This is about adjusting your lifestyle to match your genes, to be living the way your body was designed to live, rather than the way everybody else tells you should be living. So it's not a diet. It's time to get rid of the diets. Diets don't work. We already know that. It's about listening to your body and working with your body rather than working against it. So if you want to learn more, as I said, I will be going through this in a lot more details and going through the 6 different body types and letting you know about eating plans, exercise plans, and all of that. The free 5-day Secret to Thriving in Menopause workshop starts on the 18th of September. 18th of September, 6:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The link to join is bit.ly/menopause with a capital M _workshop with a capital W. So bit.ly/menopause_workshop. A capital M, capital W. Those 2 capitals are important, otherwise you won't find it. Go there, register, and then once you've registered, come and join me in the exclusive group that I've set up. And once you're into that group, you'll also find that there is a bonus Understanding Hormones e-course in there as well, which will give you an overview of what's happening with the hormones, how they're changing, and how that's impacting the way that you feel through menopause and all of that. So that's within the exclusive Facebook group. So once you register, you'll get a link, come over and request to join, and I will actually be opening that group up probably on Monday. And then you'll be able to go in there and get all those extra resources that are there waiting for us to start on the 18th of September.